I'd like to share my talk is kind of separated into three different sections. The first is kind of a general introduction to kind of my understanding of a Zen perspective on birth and death. The second part I will share the story of the birth of the Buddha and look into what the rich symbolism of that story is about, from my understanding. And then the third will be fairly short. I'll walk you through the ceremony that we'll do to honor the birth of the Buddha. And first I want to suggest, I want to say that in Zen tradition, birth and death are not separate. And I know that you just heard that birth of my daughter, as well as I want to offer my condolences to the death of Vicky's mother, Patricia. And those of you who might also know her, Zuiko Redding of the Cedar Rapids Zen Center, just passed away a couple of days ago. So I want to offer my sincere condolences to the Cedar Rapids Zen Center community. Okay, so first of all, what is birth? What is death? That's a question we have to start at. We can't assume we know the answer to that question. What is birth? What is death? Zen helps us to open up our minds, like ask the question, what is birth? We all have some ideas, so I want to lay out a diagram for you all to illustrate this. I'm going to create a whiteboard, and all right, hopefully this works. Okay, so let me see if I can draw it. Oh, just a moment. I see people can move around there. I'm just trying to. It looks like they changed things around on me last time I used this, and I apologize for that. I might just forget it. Board. Sorry, preferences, grids. Just as let's see. Okay, I'm going to forego this right now because it's not real helpful. But let's imagine a y-axis. Okay, maybe this line behind me here. Just imagine that's the y-axis, and that symbolizes space. And then you're going to have to imagine an x-axis, right? So like a plus sign, and that x-axis symbolizes time. And let's just say my arm here is the x-axis, and this line behind me is the y-axis. Okay, space and time. And if we start at this point where x and y meet, that's zero. And we could designate that point where x and y meet as birth or maybe conception. And then the line comes up, and that's representative of our life, and then our decline as we get older, and then eventually die. And that death takes place all on the x-axis, right? So you could just imagine like maybe everybody's life is different, doesn't go as smoothly as that, but just a representative. We start at zero, we occupy space for a certain period of time, and then our space diminishes, as does our time, and we return to a 0 point in terms of space. And maybe we live until we're 100 years old or 50 years old, whatever it is. Okay, that's the usual way of thinking. That's how we all think about birth and death and life in general. We have a beginning point and an end point. The Buddhist view is, though, it's a little bit different. Okay, we get that same XY axis. I'm using this line behind me for the Y axis again. And my arm, let's just pretend that's the X axis. And we start at this point here. And you have this birth and death going on. But if you can imagine, there is a place before birth and previous life. And that, if you can imagine, like a sine wave or cosine wave. If those of you are familiar with math. right? And the same thing's happening over here. There's death. There's something mysterious happens below the space line, and then there's a reemergence somewhere down the timeline and a new birth. That's a Buddhist view of birth and death. But I want to give you a Zen view of birth and death now. And the Zen view, my understanding here is, let's take that same XY, that XY axis, and we start, if we start at zero, we can put birth and death at the same point, at the 0 point, and the line will just circle around it, make a circle around birth and death, a big circle. So I want to suggest that being a Zen perspective, not the Zen perspective, but a Zen perspective, because time and space collapse around birth and death. Time is a human construct, and it dissolves when we're in the midst of birth. There is no time. It dissolves when we're in the midst of death. There is no death. Or the other way we can say that is that birth and death happen in each moment simultaneously, happening right now. There's not a beginning point or an end point to either of these. So that's my introduction. And now I'd like to share the story of the Buddha's birth. It's a very unusual story. And perhaps if I gave a title to this story, I would call it Radical Non-Attachment. So what's the story? Now I'm just going to give you a short, a brief version of the story. His conception is very interesting. It begins with Lady Maya, his mom. His mother has a dream of a white elephant with 6 tusks. She's dreaming of this white elephant with 6 tusks sticking out of its face. And the elephant, in her dream, the elephant enters the side of her body. And when she awakens from this dream, she of course tells people about it, and she feels such bliss. And this is the conception story. This is the conception of the Buddha. So the pregnancy continues over the 9-month normal time in which it takes to create a baby. And Lady Maya, again, she's a lady. Her title is Lady Maya because she's the queen of the Magadha kingdom, and she knows it's going to be time for her to give birth soon. So she and her attendants they begin the long walk to her family's home, to her parents' home. And as they're walking by a grove of solid trees, she begins to go into labor. And the labor is said to be quite difficult. The solid trees that are in that grove, the branches on the solid trees lower down, and Lady Maya holds on to those branches as she gives birth, and she gives birth standing. And so she's standing, she gives birth. And moments later, after the birth, the Buddha to be comes out of the womb, and he takes 7 steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Out of each step grows a lotus flower blooming underneath his feet. And he proclaims after the 7th step, he lifts one hand up and the other hand goes down, like this statue here of the baby Buddha. He's standing on a lotus flower. One hand is pointing up, the other hand points down to the earth. This is pointing up to heaven, the sky, the universe, and down to the earth. And he proclaims, I alone am the world honored one. I alone am the world honored one. Wow. So that's the story of the birth of the Buddha. What I'd like to do now is take a look at the mythology around this and what might it mean. So first of all, when we're talking about mythology, there are two general ways that people think about myth. One is that it is history. All right, the story of the birth of the Buddha. Some might consider that this actually happened in real life. Another view is that it's fantasy. It's a nice story, but it's not really real. And that's also a view that many of us might take when we see or hear a story like this. The third meaning is, and this is the one I want to suggest we take, is that there is what is the meaning? Is to ask the question, what is the meaning behind this mythology for us? For us, what's the purpose? What might be the purpose of a story like this? We don't have to believe that it happened historically. And to say that it's mere fantasy is to downplay the potential that this story has for guiding us in our own life. Now, we're just taking this one small part of the story, and I want to share maybe four things about this story, the symbolic sense of it, and think about how might this story be applicable to our life. So the first main symbol is the conception of the Buddha. And if you remember, there was a white elephant, 6 tusks, and it enters the side of Lady Maya. Now, there's all kinds of potential meanings for that. I want to focus on one aspect of this, and that is that, well, let me back up a second. First of all, the fact that the Buddha was born, was conceived from a dream makes it strikingly similar to a story that I grew up, and maybe some of you grew up with, I'm sure many of us grew up with as children, about the birth of Jesus. Now, I'm not going to say that they're the exact same because Buddha is not considered God, depending on who you ask, though. Whereas Jesus, for the most part, clearly is, for Christians, considered God. But the striking similarity is that the conception is miraculous. We know that, that's not really the way that conception takes place. So, how do we make sense of this story of a conception that takes place within a dream? Okay. Um, so, one possible interpretation, and I don't want to suggest that this is a helpful interpretation, but one possibility here is that holiness is somehow not compatible with sex. Right? That might be one possible interpretation, more of a kind of on a literal and a puritanical type interpretation. But if we take a more sociological view of this story, in the time of the Buddha, marriages were arranged, and in a sense, there wasn't the freedom that we understand today, at least in modern American society, around choosing your partner, who you're going to spend the rest of your days with. That was all prearranged. There was no choice about it, and so you had children with a person that you didn't necessarily choose to be with for the rest of your life. Buddha is conceived outside of the confines of the social norms of his time, right? This story is saying that the Buddha's message is somehow beyond social confines. the confines of a particular society. Right? His mom didn't choose her partner, but she has this dream, which she accepts it fully. She wants this. Right? So there is a sense here of freedom from social constraints. However much we might plan, however much we might plan pregnancy, there's a sense of unpredictability in the birth of the Buddha. It happens during a dream. And then a third possible interpretation of this is that of the mystical element of this dream. That, in fact, there is a place in Buddhist practice for looking closely at our dreams. Literally, what we dream gives us information about our life. That's something very interesting. And in maybe previous times, in U.S. culture, dreams were and for some people they still are meaning. They can be packed with meaning. I find it inspiring that we can look to the story of the birth of the Buddha and his mother dreaming all of this. That's very interesting, and the symbols around dreams, and it also can encourage us to pay attention to what happens in our own dreams. We all have dreams, and oftentimes they're fragmented and we don't really understand them, yet they might give us some piece of valuable information. When we're dreaming, we are we're processing our life, and something bigger, something much bigger than our individual understanding is at play in the dream world when we go to sleep. And so we want to pay attention there because our mind is not big enough to hold the immensity of the universe, and yet the immensity of the universe is flowing through us all the time. We just can't grasp it. So pay attention to your dreams. All right. The second symbol I want to look at is the birth under the Sala trees, and the idea that the, the tree branches bend down towards the towards Lady Maya. Right? What could that mean? That these trees are bending down to hold her, to support her. One sense that I see here is that the universe, everything is watching us with compassionate eyes. Right? The whole world is there. The trees, the birds, the water, the rain, the lakes. All of this is for us to understand and develop our compassion. All right? Life bends towards human will. Life bends toward those boughs bending. It's life bending towards human will. Human beings create the world that we live in. Everything around us is here either because we made it or because we decided not to touch it. We can look at the entire world right now, at least on Earth. Every surface is inhabited by human beings, and we create what we see around us. The buildings that we're in, the land that we inhabit, we have created, or we've decided not to touch it. It's here because of the human will. And the Buddhist way of talking about this is that everything is mind. Everything is mind. The entire universe is pervaded with mind, not just this little thing up here. Right? The entire universe is pervaded with mind. Okay, there's a third symbol here, the lotus flowers. And each step the Buddha takes, right? There's a flower blooms. How we walk, each one of us, and when I say how we walk, I'm thinking of that literally, but also figuratively, how we walk in our life. In other words, our actions themselves have the capacity to generate life or to diminish it. And the message of the Buddha, of the baby Buddha, is that we ought to live in such a way to allow life to flourish, just like those blossoms open up at each step that the Buddha takes. Life is blooming. How can we live? Right? This is the message for us. How can we live? How can we walk in such a way that life blooms around us? Right? The walk is just as important as the talk. Actually, sometimes the walk is even more important than what we say. How do we live? And what we do, this is the tricky part, needs to be in alignment with what we say, right? What we say and what we do, if they're in alignment, well, we got something, then that's how trust develops. We have to be careful also about grabbing for the end result. Life is happening right now, all around us. Birth is happening in this moment. The universe begins when? Some say a long time ago. But from a Zen perspective, birth is happening in this moment, right now. In every moment, this moment now, there's birth. The entire universe is created in this moment, in this moment, and in this moment. It keeps going, it keeps flowering forward. But we humans, we grasp. We want some end product that we want to bring in and hold on to. We need to be careful about that and align ourselves with that first precept. Not to, when we start doing this, grabbing, grabbing for the future, I want this, right? I'm not saying we shouldn't have goals or desires for something special in the future, but how do we get there? That's the question, right? How do we generate life? Okay, and the fourth thing, the fourth symbolism is the speaking of truth, right? The Buddha, the baby Buddha, one hand up, one hand down. And he says, I alone, under heaven and earth, am the world honored one. And I like us to, I would like us to consider this as a mudra. This is a mudra, just like the cosmic mudra. When we sit in zazen, we place our hands in that cosmic mudra, right? Holding our hands in our lap, the front tip slightly touching. But let's try this now together. Let's try right hand coming up. Go ahead. Join me here, please. Right hand going up, left hand pointing down to the earth. And you can say to yourself, I alone under heaven and earth am the world honored one. With utter seriousness, I alone under heaven and earth am the world honored one. Who am I talking about? I'm talking about you, right? I alone, when you do this, one hand up, one hand down, I alone am the world honored one. Now, we have to be careful about this, though, because in our culture, in our time, we have this sense of kind of radical individualism, and That's not this story. That's not what this story is about. It's about the entire universe is waking up to Buddhahood through this moment, right? All of us, you alone are the world honored one. To say you is not referring to your person, your physical personality. It's that you, that I, the Buddha speaks, is the entire universe when he says I alone. I all one, all alone, all one. We are all one, right? So when the Buddha says, the baby Buddha says, I alone, he's talking about the big self. He's talking about you and me and all beings. All beings are the world honors. We are honored, each of us, by our very birth, our very existence here. We are we are the honored ones right here. And if that's the case, if we are the honored ones, then what does that say about what we should be doing? Right? Take your life seriously. Your purpose, your sense of purpose, your sense of what do you want to do with this precious life? So this birth of the Buddha is kind of an interesting set of opposites. We don't it's completely different from what we imagine a birth to be. The Buddha speaks eloquently at his birth versus crying like babies usually do. He is able to walk versus total vulnerability, can't hardly move, total dependence, right? There's a sense of purity. There's a sense of purity in the birth of the Buddha. He's conceived of in a dream versus the messiness of relationships that we all get ourselves involved in. Relationships are very messy, right? And children are very messy. But the Buddha just seems to be the exact opposite. One, the Buddha's story is pointing us to non attachment, right? But our life, the way that we generally see it, is one of attachments to greed, hate, and delusion. Don't forget the larger goal of our life, right? What's our deeper purpose? Versus we're in this worldview of constant greed, hate, and delusion, right? These are the two extremes, right, that we find ourselves in. This purity or impurity. Uh, the Buddha's story is that we each of us, regardless of our messy lives, we each have the capacity to fully awaken. That's the vision of Lady Maya, that we each have the ability to nourish life. That's that's the walking, right? That's how each step that we take, we each have the ability to nourish life with each step that we take. Every moment is a possibility that we can generate life, positive life. We can experience the unity of the universe like under the solid trees, right? Those branches coming down. This world is created by us. Even the trees are given permission, in a sense, to live, but they also have their own life energy, their life force. And like the Buddha, to be able to speak the truth. I alone am the world honored one under heaven and earth. To speak our truth, to speak your truth. What is your truth? So I'd like to close with this poem. Birth, no birth. What is this? Am, am I a dream? A tree? A flower? Who put these words in my mouth? Shh. Quietly, quietly take refuge in Buddha and Dharma and in each other. All right. Now, when as we close here, you've got a circumambulation and pouring, ladling water over the baby Buddha, right? So there's a chant that goes along with that. It goes like this.
It's on the wall.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Right? So you just repeat that, and I think you've got the words there for you to
You're
remember
on.
them.
It's all over the wall. Could we
Awesome,
do it?
you
Could
got
we do it? Could we do it once, and you can listen to us? Could you do it? Could you do it once with us again?
absolutely. Let me just add here that when we're pouring water over the baby Buddha, we are also watering the seed of the baby Buddha in us. That's it, right? That baby Buddha, right? This baby Buddha is not something outside of you. So just to keep that in mind as you approach the Buddha and ladle tea water over the Buddha. It's not, this isn't something outside of yourself. It's to water the seed of Buddhahood in you, right? Okay, let's do it. Let's do
So
it.
what
Should we
we're
chant?
gonna do is I'm gonna offer the gifts, and then
Okay.
I'm gonna see if this is the right. We didn't talk about this, but I'm gonna offer the gifts, and then I'm gonna do 3 bows, and then I'm gonna pour the water over the Buddha. Does that sound good? And then everybody else will follow.
Sounds great. Sounds
Okay.
wonderful.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama yeah.
All
Yeah,
right.
that sounds wonderful. That sounds wonderful. You can even do it maybe just a tiny little bit faster.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
All right. So thank you guys online. If you want to, you're welcome to stay to watch the ladling, or if you, you can also participate and then just imagine yourself in the shoes of the folks that are ladling water over the Buddha. That's also you doing that, and just participate in that way if you'd like.
So what we'll do is, like I said, I'll offer the gifts, and then we can just start with Fergus, and then we can just go in a circle. You can just come up, bow, come around, and then ladle, and then just walk around in a circle like that. Actually, I don't think even worry about bowing at the mat. Just come here, maybe bow before the altar, and then ladle, step to the side, bow, and then the next person comes in. Sound good?
Three ladles, right?
Pardon?
3 ladles.
3 ladles, thank you.
And if it's possible to lift the camera on the computer just a little bit higher so we can, people's heads are getting cut off.
Oh, okay.
There, oh, perfect, great, yeah,
Yeah,
that's awesome.
thank you. Just 2 more.
And please feel free to begin the chanting. Namo tassa Sam